In general with Gauntlets, you want to stay close. I mean, duh, right? Like, obviously you want to stay close to your opponent, but I see a lot of Gauntlets players try to sidelight from really far away, and they keep getting punished when all they need to do, rather than sidelighting here, is just take another step forward and maybe try to sidelight here instead. And of course, this is a tip that applies to literally every weapon in this game, but you want to be focusing more on your movement rather than your actual attacking button, because if I dlight or I sidelight or I dash jump dair from all the way over here, obviously the only time that this would ever hit is if my opponent just blindly walks into it, and you don't want to be betting on that. Now in terms of cutting space, of course, movement is a big factor, right? You want to know how to dash dance, dash jump, get closer to your opponent, right? But if you want another easy way to cut space, literally just weapon throw. Of course, weapon throw into nlight is a classic with every weapon in this game. Something that's great though on Gauntlets is you can do weapon throw into sidelight. Weapon throw into sidelight is really good for catching people who not only stand still, right, but also people who try to jump or dodge away from you. Weapon throw into sidelight, if you manage to catch it, it leads to more damage because sidelight is a string starter. Weapon throw is also a great way to continue your strings or maintain pressure. For example, if I hit sidelight recovery nair, technically my opponent is actually in a more advantageous position than me because they get sent downwards, they're closer to the stage, right? Gauntlets has a big weakness where the aerial kit isn't really good for covering people below you and kind of far away from you, right? All the moves are kind of stubby and short-ranged. So in this situation, I can actually throw my weapon to continue my string, or I can literally just throw my weapon at them to cover my landing, and I don't even have to pick it up after. I can just reset. Now, in general, when it comes to like positioning yourself, the best place on stage to be is generally next to your opponent because, again, you have some of the fastest grounded options in the game in the form of sidelight and nlight. If you're trying to space out a dlight, yes, it helps to be a little bit farther away. The other best place to be as a Gauntlets player is right below your opponent because you can do a recovery. You can also do a nair. So what I'm trying to say is that being below your opponent is quite advantageous as a Gauntlets player, but being way above your opponent, like this, in a juggle situation is highly disadvantageous, because you don't really have any other solutions besides weapon throw, especially if you're fighting a bow player who can very easily juggle you or snipe you out of the air. It's a very difficult position to be in when you're falling back down to the ground. Sidelight is a great setup tool when you're around this range, right? But don't forget about nlight, because it's literally instant, and at early damages like white to yellow, it's equally good at setting up into reads as sidelight. For example, you can do nlight into sidelight, or like reverse sidelight, right? You can do nlight into some form of nair to catch aerial options. You can do nlight into X pivot dair, which has a lot of follow-up potential. You can also do nlight into nlight. As you see there, it has enough active frames that it'll catch through the dodge, right? And I end up saying this in every video, but you don't need to follow up off of everything. You can do nlight into nothing. See here, we literally just take our whatever 15 damage, send our opponent away from us, we're gaining stage control. Even if we don't follow up here, we're still gaining value off of this move. My main point here is that sidelight is not the only way to set up for a lot of potential damage, because yes, sidelight could lead to a lot of reads, but nlight pushes the opponent off stage, which could lead to an edgeguard situation, which is very advantageous for Gauntlets. A lot of Gauntlets players know that sidelight into GC sidelight is a great read because it catches multiple options. Whether you do it forward, you could do it reverse, or even add a jump before you do the GC sidelight, right, to catch people who go higher up. But I feel like a lot of people forget that's not the only place you can do GC sidelight to read. You can also do sidelight recovery, and in this situation, not a lot of people will directly fall onto you because they know that you could hit recovery into nair, right? So a lot of people will drift either to the left or the right, and if they don't have a dodge here, this is a very easy GC sidelight recovery off the top. But also, sidelight GC sidelight burns your dodge and puts you in a very bad position if you miss. In general, like I said, you don't really want to be getting juggled as a Gauntlets player, as any Brawlhalla player, right? But especially on Gauntlets, because you don't really have the tools to counter juggling. So my main advice here is, yes, sidelight GC sidelight is a very strong read, but you don't want to be using it all the time. The vast majority of Gauntlet reads at the highest level are not sidelight into GC sidelight, but more so sidelight into some form of like nair or recovery, because you can kind of just follow your opponent and react to where they go. And if you're on white to yellow damage and you hit a GC sidelight read, you don't really get too much out of it afterwards, except for maybe like recovery nair. But if you catch the same dodge using a nair, you get a lot more confirmed damage in the form of some sort of GC dlight punish, If you catch this read at later damages, you can get a GC Scythe recovery to kill off the top, or you can even get something like a nair into a ground pound to kill off the bottom. Another great thing about Sidelight Nair is that if you miss this read, you can actually still do a recovery afterwards if your opponent moves into you. I'll show a clip on screen of this right now. And another alternative to GC Sidelight is literally just Sidelight, fall down to the ground, Sidelight again. It's literally the same thing, but without a GC, and it only covers people who go downwards, but this is a very strong option. Dlight is your main source of building damage because, of course, it leads into most commonly Sidelight, right, which you can read out of, but also don't neglect the other Dlight combos. Dlight nlight is very useful for just simply pushing your opponent off the stage and gaining stage control. Dlight dair is also an option that's great for setting up into other reads. Dlight is also your main source of range on the kit. Dlight hits from super far away, and even if you hit the very edge of this hitbox, you still get all your true combos. Gauntlet GC Dlight is one of the strongest GC Dlights in the game, up there with Sword, because of one, the range, but also you get a lot of very valuable true combos out of it. As we see here, we get GC Dlight into nair. If they have no dodge, we can get a confirmed GC Dlight nair dair, which is a lot of damage. That used to be true. That was one of the worst times in Brawlhalla, if anyone remembers that. But also, I mean, you kind of just like throw them all the way across the stage. And if you don't want to fling them all the way across the stage, you can definitely just reverse the nair. And probably the most important use case for GC Dlight is, as Gauntlet's only true kill confirm, GC Dlight into recovery, this is extremely useful. But just because you don't have a true kill confirm doesn't make it difficult to kill on Gauntlets. As we see here, we have access to jump fast fall recovery, which is such a strong option because Gauntlet recovery has a lot of priority. As we see, it has a lot of vertical height. So if your opponent burns a dodge like this, and all they have left are jumps, it's pretty easy to just chase them down in recovery. Recovery is going to be your main kill option on this weapon because you don't always want to rely on something like a GC to be able to kill your opponent. Not to mention, you also have things like nlight, which, yeah, it'll take forever to kill, but it will kill eventually. And if your opponent likes to jump a lot, you do have access to jump sair to read this, which will kill very early, and if it doesn't kill, at the very least, it spikes them all the way down to the bottom of the map. Dlight dash jump sair is one of your best options if your opponent has no dodge, because as we see here, I'm literally hitting it from the middle of the stage and it's immediately spiking him. Nair is one of the best moves on the kit, not only because it's super fast, but also there's a lot of drift with the move, so it's not super easy to punish. You can kind of just run around spamming this move, right? Not to mention, if you hit one of these nairs and you have a lot of momentum like this, you get a free GC nlight true combo. Dair is good too, but in a lot of situations, rather than daring, it's best to just fall below them and try to nair them instead. It has the same kind of follow-ups and reads afterwards, but the difference is that with nair, obviously you get out of active frames quicker, so it's a little bit easier to punish a dair. But don't get me wrong, dair isn't a bad move, and it does have its place in the kit. Like, if they whiff really bad and you're above them anyway, you might as well just fall on top of them with a dair. And unlike nair, if you manage to catch a dodge with a dair, you actually get a confirmed recovery afterwards. But the main situation you want to avoid is literally just daring the floor. I mean, if you miss and you're punching the floor, this is the easiest punish in the game. Another thing you want to avoid is doing a falling dair off stage. I mean, yes, I guess it could technically have its uses, but if you do this, I mean, in most cases, you're just going to fall down all the way down to the bottom of the map. If you're going to dair off stage, you can do a rising dair like this, take advantage of the active frames to kind of cover the entire wall for a second. But in general, there are better options than doing some form of dair off stage, like nair and sair, which we'll talk about more later. Some situations where dair is good is if you do nlight into X pivot dair. The X pivot makes it a little bit safer because, as you see, you're kind of throwing yourself in the opposite direction if you miss. And I know I just said to not use dair off stage, but you can do an X pivot dair like this. As you see there, the X pivot allows me to kind of like stick to the wall right afterwards, so it's not that risky. Not to mention, if your opponent has no dodge, right, it's very hard to avoid this dair because of the amount of active frames. Just like Cannon and Lance Sair, Gauntlet Sair has a little bit of momentum, so you can use it to recover back to the stage, right? But my main advice here is, if you get sent really far off stage, don't just immediately start mashing Sair, because if you start, spamming Sair right out of hit stun, it's almost like spamming dodge in out of hit stun. It's basically the same thing. any good player will be able to read you mashing Sair off stage and punish you for it. So if you get sent really far off stage, just take a second to wait. Right out of hit stun, don't immediately Sair. Take your time recovering back to stage. You can stall very hard using Gauntlet Sair. And of course, this goes for fighting fellow Gauntlets players or Cannon and Lance players, right? When you send them off stage, try to read them mashing Sair. It's something that you can very easily take advantage of. Now, off stage can get pretty tricky, especially because of how many options your opponent has to recover, but the general rule of thumb is that if you're below them, try to look for a nair, and if you're to the side of them, you can look for Sair. Sair is really good for reading instant jumps like that. As you see, we can do Sair into Sair to read jumps. After you hit a Sair, you should also be looking to catch ground pounds, to catch jumps, and if you manage to catch a dodge with either a nair or Sair, it's a great time to look for a ground pound. Just remember, when you're ground pounding, to manually release the button. As we see here, the hitbox is a lot bigger if you manually release it, compared to if you hold the button like this, and you wait for that tiny little hitbox like this to connect with your opponent, it makes the ground pound a lot less consistent. Some other options we have are Sair into weapon throw, which of course can lead into an unarmed dair afterwards, which puts a lot of pressure on your opponent, like that. And of course you can do nair into weapon throw as well, but in my personal opinion, since nair sends closer to you than a Sair does, right? A Sair would have spiked my opponent all the way out here. It's easier to get a follow-up off of a nair, so you might as well keep the weapon in your hand and look for something like, you know, a Sair or ground pound right there. And a lot of people only like to think about trying to kill your opponent by sending them downwards or sideways, but remember, when your opponent is really weak anyway, you also have access to this really strong recovery, so you can just straight up kill them outright off the top of the map as they're coming back to the stage. Some other tips I have are, don't forget that you can actually Sair into the wall, like this, which will still spike your opponent. And I end up saying this in every video, but even for a weapon that's as good off stage as Gauntlets, you don't always need to throw yourself off stage looking for some gimp. You can exert a lot of pressure on your opponent when they're off stage by just standing on the ledge here, because you have access to moves like dlight. As we see here, it's super long, right? And it hits super low, so if their opponent is riding their head up the wall like this is a free dlight. Not to mention, if they don't have a dodge when you hit that dlight, you can get a very early knockout with dlight ground pound. And a lot of times when your opponent is recovering, they'll end up in like this one jump height area, this middle area, right? So you can read this with a jump Sair. A lot of people will save their dodge, try and get through you like this, or they'll try to dodge directly through you like this. In either of these cases, this is a free nlight, because remember, this move has so many active frames, it'll catch through the dodge. For people who try to dodge past you like this, you can also do a hard cross-up read in the form of GC dlight like that. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye.